Hey everyone, this is Michael again, and welcome to the Monday Night Raw review. Monday Night Raw tonight was from the Bon Secours Wellness Arena in Greenville, South Carolina. And Monday Night Raw tonight, I thought it was a decent show tonight. We had the quarterfinals of the King and Queen of the Ring tournament take place. We had Iyo Sky versus Shayna Baszler. Quarterfinals match in the Queen of the Ring tournament. We had Gunther versus Kofi in a King of the Ring quarterfinals tournament match. Bronson was in action, and he had taken on Akira Tozawa. We had Lyra Valkyria versus Zoey Stark, of course, quarterfinals match in the Queen of the Ring tournament. We had Zayn versus Otis. Becky Lynch was in action, and she had taken on Dakota. We also had a number of contenders fatal four-way match to determine who will face R-Truth and The Miz, Awesome Truth, for the Raw Tag Team Championship. So it was the Judgment Day versus New Catch Republic versus Authors of Pain versus the Creed Brothers. And the main event, we had Jey Uso, Mr. Yeet, versus Ilja Dragunov. Quarterfinals match in the King of the Ring tournament. But overall, Monday Night Raw tonight, decent show it was. But anyways, let's jump right into the review. Monday Night Raw opened up tonight with Drew McIntyre. Drew McIntyre was shown walking backstage, and he stormed into gorilla position, and he went through the curtains. Really like how WWE is doing, this camera work with superstars walking backstage and through gorilla position, through the curtains, out to the stage, and then to the ring. Really am loving that, what they're doing. So Drew McIntyre walked onto the stage, and he headed to the commentary table, to which Michael Cole on commentary called McIntyre a hypocrite. And of course, Pat McAfee ended up throwing Michael Cole under the bus because of Cole calling McIntyre a hypocrite, which of course McIntyre heard Michael Cole end up calling him a hypocrite. So McIntyre stood in the ring. We had a CM Punk chant end up picking up from the crowd there in Greenville. So McIntyre got on the mic. He ended up saying that Punk might have shown up if it was in Atlanta or Charlotte, but not in Greenville. So McIntyre ended up saying that CM Punk only makes the big towns brothers. He ended up saying that Punk said when he is pushed that he is Satan himself, and that the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. McIntyre ended up saying that the greatest trick Punk ever pulled was looking like a drug addict without taking any drugs. He ended up saying the greatest trick that Punk's ever pulled is getting people to trust him repeatedly, no matter how many times he breaks your trust. So McIntyre ended up saying that management keeps taking him back like an abusive relationship. So McIntyre ended up saying that the other thing that he doesn't get is how the people buy into all the crap that Punk spews out of his mouth. McIntyre ended up saying that he doesn't like talking to people like they're stupid. He ended up saying, if you're a CM Punk fan, you're stupid. So McIntyre said that, and then he ended up saying that last week, Punk was in the ring calling him a coward and challenging him to a fight. So Punk ended up leaving the arena in his car from what we saw last week. So McIntyre was like, it's like he has a stooge inside in Adam Pearce. So McIntyre ended up saying that eventually he'll get his hands on Punk and torture him, and that Punk will beg him to tear his tricep. McIntyre ended up saying until then, he won't waste his time on a guy who won't be cleared for the next 20 years. He ended up saying, speaking of things that will never happen, Jey Uso lost another title match. McIntyre's title match. McIntyre ended up saying that Jay's reward is his spot in the King of the Ring tournament, and that's complete bullshit. McIntyre ended up saying that he'll deal with Jay later, and that the number one thing on his priority list is the World Heavyweight Championship and the paper champion, Damian Priest. Which that bought out Damian Priest, the World Heavyweight Champion. Damian Priest made his way to the ring, and Priest ended up coming off as a babyface here in this segment with McIntyre. So Priest got on the mic. He ended up saying that McIntyre has some serious issues. He ended up saying since McIntyre can't shut that hole in his face, why doesn't he do something different? He ended up saying that he thinks McIntyre should say what he's going to say. But this time, he'll do it to someone's face. So McIntyre ended up saying that if Priest was listening, Punk has been running away every week. McIntyre ended up saying that he will say something positive about Priest. He ended up saying that Priest has paid his dues and deserves all success in the world, and that he doesn't deserve to be World Heavyweight Champion. So McIntyre ended up saying that his next door neighbor, Dave, has an inspirational story, but it doesn't mean he should be the World Heavyweight Champion. So Priest ended up telling McIntyre to stop it because he's delusional. He ended up saying that McIntyre is blaming everyone else for his failures. McIntyre ended up saying that he's been a superstar since he was 21. He then ended up telling the crowd to say what if Priest is a bullshit champion. But Priest ended up saying that he's still a champion. Priest ended up telling McIntyre to look in the mirror and blame that asshole. Priest ended up saying that he wanted to cash in on Seth Rollins. Then they could have gone to war at WrestleMania. He ended up saying that McIntyre stopped him from cashing in multiple times, and that's his fault. He ended up saying that McIntyre explained to the world that if Priest was smart, he'd wait until he was champion to cash in. So Priest ended up saying that is on McIntyre. Priest then ended up saying that he wants to talk about WrestleMania, and that McIntyre finally achieved his goal, and all he had to do was grab his wife's hand and enjoy his moment. He ended up saying that McIntyre saw Punk and made him more important than himself. He ended up saying this championship and his wife. Priest then pointed out that McIntyre got his ass whooped by a one-armed man. He ended up saying then he cashed it in. He ended up saying that McIntyre's elbow will heal and he'll be cleared. Priest ended up saying to McIntyre that if he wants a shot at the World Heavyweight Championship, he's got it. He ended up saying that McIntyre can call him a paper champion all he wants. But when he's done with McIntyre, he'll make him eat those words. Priest ended up saying they can all rise for that. So then Priest ended up walking off, and pretty much that was basically that. But overall, I thought this was a very good segment to open Monday Night Raw here. You know, Drew McIntyre, you know, coming out there, you know, and talking about Punk. You know, this feud is going really well here with Drew McIntyre and CM Punk. You know, when CM Punk finally gets in the ring with Drew McIntyre, it's going to be one hell of a match there. And of course, Damian Priest coming out there, coming off as a babyface, spitting true facts to Drew McIntyre. You know, I thought that was very strong. And it looks like this could be setting up for Clash at the Castle next month. I think we'll be getting Drew McIntyre versus Damian Priest for the World Heavyweight Championship at Clash at the Castle in Scotland. So, looking forward to it. And then we saw early in the day Shayna Baszler and Zoey Stark were walking into the arena. Damage Control end up confronting Baszler and Stark. Iyo Sky shoved Shayna Baszler, and officials quickly broke it up between the both of them. So, that was that. Just to further their matchup, tonight. And then we had the first match of the night. The Queen of the Ring quarterfinal match, Iyo Sky versus Shayna Baszler. And this was a good match here between these two. Iyo Sky made her way to the ring alongside Dakota Kai and Kairi Sane. Iyo Sky looked at the Queen of the Ring crown because on the stage they had on one side the crown for the Queen of the Ring, the other side the crown for the King of the Ring. Both the King and Queen of the Ring crowns look absolutely great. Really like the designs of them. So as Iyo Sky entered the ring, Shayna Baszler ended up blindsiding Iyo Sky, yanked her over the top rope. Shayna Baszler ended up kicking Iyo Sky in her face. Referees ended up running down to keep Baszler back. And pretty much Monday Night Raw went to commercial. Then when Monday Night Raw came back from the commercial, the match was already in progress. Iyo Sky ended up ducking some offense from Baszler. She ended up landing on her feet to counter a back body drop. Iyo Sky ended up clipping Shayna Baszler's leg, and she delivered a basement drop kick. Iyo Sky kicked up, and she ended up hitting the ropes. She ended up charging at Baszler. Baszler ended up sidestepping Iyo Sky. Sky landed outside the ring on her feet. Shayna Baszler then ended up trying to leave the ring to get to Iyo Sky, but Sky ended up sweeping Shayna Baszler's feet on the apron. And of course, we had the QR code appear, the Uncle Howdy thing, for them setting up a new Wyatt family. So Iyo Sky ended up going for a springboard. Shayna Baszler ended up snapping Iyo Sky off the top rope. Baszler ended up climbing to the second rope, and she ended up lifting Iyo Sky up with an armbar. Baszler ended up dropping Iyo to the floor. She then ended up attacking Iyo at ringside and threw Iyo into the barricade and into the apron. Baszler ended up getting Iyo in the ring, but Iyo quickly rolled out, ended up holding her arm in pain. Shayna Baszler ended up clubbing Iyo, ended up lifting her on the ring apron. Shayna Baszler ended up pulling Io's arm in the ring's frame, and she ended up kicking it against the metal. So Baszler ended up getting Iyo in the ring. She ended up going for the cover, and Iyo ended up kicking out. Baszler then applied an overhead wrist lock, ended up bending her down to the mat. Baszler ended up setting up to stomp Io's arm, but Iyo ended up taking her down. Iyo started fighting back. She ended up hitting Baszler with a run hurricanrana. She then connected with a spin kick to Baszler's head. So Baszler ended up connecting with an arm breaker, ended up putting Iyo on the top rope. Iyo ended up managing to fight out of the arm breaker. She ended up knocking Baszler into a tree of woe. Baszler ended up soon falling to ringside. Iyo then ended up wiping out Baszler with a side moonsault. And then Monday Night Raw went to commercial. Then when Monday Night Raw came back from the commercial, Iyo ended up rolling Baszler up, and Baszler ended up kicking out. Iyo connected with an uppercut and started punching Baszler into the corner. Iyo backed up, and she ended up charging at Baszler, but Baszler dropped Iyo on the apron. Iyo ended up blocking the kick, and she ended up snapping Baszler's leg off the middle rope. So Baszler's knee was injured when she was in that tree of woe. It was a little bit awkward. It was like an awkward tree of woe when Baszler was, in that, tree of woe. So Iyo ended up connecting with a springboard missile dropkick to Baszler. Iyo ended up hitting a double run knee against the ropes, and she ended up going for the cover, to which Baszler ended up kicking out. Iyo ended up headed to the top rope for an over the moonsault, but Baszler got her feet up. Iyo blocked it and countered into a pin. and Baszler ended up soon countering that counter from Iyo into a Akira through the clutch. Iyo ended up managing to roll out of that Akira through the clutch, and she applied a crossface on Baszler. Baszler ended up fighting out, and out of the crossface, she ended up kneeing Iyo in the face, and she ended up going for the cover, to which Iyo ended up kicking out. Iyo blocked the kick from Baszler, and she ended up hitting a dragon screw, and then she ended up connecting with a meteor in the corner to Baszler. Iyo ended up going to the top rope. She then ended up hitting the over the moonsault on Baszler. She went for the cover, and there you go. Iyo Sky ended up winning the match, and she advances to the semifinals of the Queen of the Ring tournament. She will take on either Lyra, Valkyria, or Zoey Stark. But post-match, we had Jackie Redmond in the ring with Iyo Sky, interviewing her. Jackie Redmond ended up mentioning to Iyo that she'll compete in a semifinal match next week on Raw against either Lyra, Valkyria, or Zoey Stark. Iyo ripped the mic away from Jackie Redmond, and she was shouting in Japanese, and pretty much that was basically that. But overall, I thought this was a very good match between Iyo Sky and Shayna Baszler here. The crowd was enjoying it. They were chanting, of course, "This is awesome." But good match it was. And then we saw JD McDonough. JD McDonough was talking with Baszler backstage, Finn Bálor. Carlito was chatting with Dominic. Damian Priest ended up walking in. Damian Priest wanted to know what was going on here. Dominic ended up telling Priest that it's time for them to work together. Carlito ended up saying that they all agreed that Rey Mysterio is a selfish bastard, proving when he gave his WrestleMania spot to Dragon Lee. And he ended up saying no one knows better than Dominic. No one knows Rey better than Dominic, of course, because, Dominic is Rey's son. So Carlito ended up saying that Rhea Ripley is out, and Dominic is injured, and that they could use some muscle and benefit from each other. Priest ended up saying that the others want to work with him, that's fine. Priest ended up saying that as far as he is concerned, Carlito is not welcome here. So Carlito ended up saying that Damian Priest doesn't trust him, but the most stubborn minds can be changed. He ended up saying maybe one day they can all be amigos. So Carlito ended up walking off, and pretty much that was basically that. And then we had Chad Gable, as Monday Night Raw came back from the commercial. Chad Gable was walking in front of, his Alpha Academy stablemates, Otis, Akira Tozawa, and Maxine Dupree. Chad Gable ended up saying to them that we're on the cusp of his big Intercontinental Championship match in Saudi Arabia. He sarcastically ended up saying that Maxine Dupree had a great weekend gallivanting in the ring and blowing an opportunity in the Queen of the Ring tournament. He ended up saying that Maxine embarrassed the Alpha Academy, and that's pathetic. Who would want to see Maxine Dupree advance in the Queen of the Ring tournament? Nobody. Chad Gable ended up saying that tonight is about redemption. He ended up saying that it will be Otis versus Sami Zayn. He ended up saying that his number one guy to soften up Sami Zayn before their match. So Gable ended up saying that he needs the serious Otis and not the dancer. Gable ended up making him say, no matter what. He ended up saying as for Tozawa, he has a big opportunity, so he better not blow it against Bronson Reed. And pretty much that was basically that. And then Ivy Nile ended up approaching Maxine Dupree. She ended up saying to Dupree that she would have helped her train for the Queen of the Ring. Maxine ended up apologizing to Ivy Nile. Ended up saying that Chad Gable doesn't want her trained outside the academy. Ivy Nile ended up telling her that she doesn't need to take that. So then Chad Gable ended up coming up, and he ended up telling Maxine to keep walking. Chad Gable then ended up telling Ivy Nile to stop hanging around Taylor Not So Swift and focus on herself. So pretty much that was basically that. Chad Gable wants, his Alpha Academy to get redemption, and start winning matches. And then we had Kathy Kelly. Kathy Kelly was backstage with Kofi Kingston and Xavier Woods. Xavier Woods was shown on a crutch. Kathy Kelly ended up mentioning that Kofi has done the unthinkable before. She ended up asking Kofi how will he do it again and beat Gunther. Kofi ended up telling Kathy Kelly that he's done it before and that tonight is about payback. Kofi ended up saying that last week he went toe-to-toe with the greatest luchador of all time, Rey Mysterio. He ended up saying that there is no room for fear or self-doubt in the ring, and that there is no room for failure. Kofi ended up saying that he knows how much this tournament means to Xavier. To which Xavier ended up saying that Gunther wants the crown, but winning it means having honor. He ended up saying that Xavier Woods was injured by Gunther and cannot defend his honor. So Kofi ended up saying tonight he will show Gunther exactly why New Day rocks. Pretty much that was that. Little interview with Kofi. And then we saw Samantha Irvin. Samantha Irvin ended up introducing Lillian Garcia. Yes, we had Lillian Garcia make an appearance on Monday Night Raw tonight. One of the best in-ring announcers, from back in the day. It was her, and then on SmackDown, it was Tony Chimmel. Like, whenever I think of, back in the day from my childhood, I always think of Lillian Garcia and Tony Chimmel as, the ring announcers. They were my childhood. And, a little bit, the late, great Howard Finkel, he was there, from time to time. So, but that's always what comes to mind when I think back, at watching, WWE from my childhood and hearing the ring announcers, Lillian Garcia and Tony Chimmel, when Tony Chimmel was, doing the ring announcing for SmackDown. So the crowd there in Greenville ended up giving Lillian Garcia a ovation for which she deserves. Samantha Irvin ended up asking if Lillian Garcia will give her the honor of helping introduce the next match. So Lillian Garcia ended up obliging, and she ended up saying that she is so proud of Samantha Irvin, who is doing an incredible job as the ring announcer for Monday Night Raw. So Lillian Garcia and Samantha Irvin ended up hugging. And then Lillian Garcia ended up introducing the King of the Ring quarterfinal match, scheduled for one fall. And that led to Kofi Kingston ended up coming out. So then Monday Night Raw went to commercial. Then when Monday Night Raw came back from the commercial, we saw Adam Pearce. Adam Pearce was there with R-Truth. R-Truth was talking to Pearce. The Miz came in, and he ended up telling R-Truth not to put their titles on the line without talking to him. Pearce ended up saying that the titles aren't on the line, but they need new number one contenders. Kiana James then walked in. She ended up saying that she is looking forward to working under Adam Pearce's tutelage. Pearce ended up saying that if Kiana James needs anything, she shouldn't hesitate. Kiana James ended up telling Pearce that she doesn't hesitate. She adjudicates. R-Truth was confused about whether that's even PG, which, was funny. And pretty much that was that. So it looks like Kiana James is going to be working under Adam Pearce on Monday Night Raw. And then we had the King of the Ring quarterfinals match. So it was Kofi Kingston versus Gunther. And this was a very entertaining match here. This was a good match. I was surprised at how long it went, because I thought that Gunther was going to just, have a few minutes at the ring and squash Kofi, and he would just move on in the tournament. But surprisingly, it, went on, long, the match. So as Gunther ended up making his way out, he got on the apron. Kofi ended up drop kicking Gunther to the floor. Kofi started punching away at Gunther, and then he ended up getting Gunther in the ring. Kofi then ended up hitting a suicide dive to Gunther. Kofi started continuing to punch away at Gunther. Gunther ended up quickly removing his jacket. Kofi ended up drop kicking Gunther into the LED apron. Kofi then ended up attacking Gunther's knee, but Gunther fought back and he delivered a chop to Kofi, which echoed throughout the arena. It was a loud chop. You know, Gunther with those loud-ass chops that he gives. Gunther then ended up whipping Kofi into the ring steps, but Kofi ended up leaping up the steps. He ended up going to the second rope. Kofi ended up taking Gunther down with a flying clothesline. He then grabbed Gunther and stopped him from getting in the ring. Kofi then ended up snapping Gunther's leg off the apron and the ring post. Kofi then entered the ring and he ended up twisting Gunther's leg on the middle rope. Kofi then ended up drop kicking the knee against the ropes, and the bell still hasn't even rung here. You know, with Kofi taking out Gunther here, the bell wasn't even rung yet. The match had yet to start. So the referee didn't even check on Gunther. The ref called for the bell to start the match. Gunther avoided the trouble in paradise from Kofi and ended up going for a German suplex. Kofi flipped through the suplex and landed on his feet. He then drop-kicked Gunther in his injured knee to take him down. Kofi ended up going to the top rope, and he connected with a boom drop on Gunther. He went for the cover, to which Gunther kicked out. Gunther rolled out of the ring to recover. Kofi ended up hitting the ropes. He ended up going for the suicide dive, but he got caught by Gunther. Gunther ended up slinging Kofi into the ring apron, and he ended up chopping Kofi's chest. Gunther then ended up hitting a vicious back suplex onto the barricade to Kofi, and then he ended up giving Kofi a back suplex onto the commentary table. Gunther then pulled the top of the commentary table off, and he ended up getting in the ring to break up the count from the ref. Gunther then locked Kofi in the Boston Crab on top of the table, which that was a nice spot there. So then Monday Night Raw went to commercial. So then when Monday Night Raw came back from the commercial, Kofi was fighting back at Gunther with some kicks to his knee. Gunther ended up quickly taking Kofi down and started stomping away on Kofi's spine. He then whipped Kofi hard into the corner, and Kofi collapsed in pain. Kofi ended up fighting back with some chops and punches, and he ended up attacking Gunther's injured knee. Gunther ended up quickly cutting Kofi off with a scoop slam. He then applied a bow and arrow stretch on Kofi, but Kofi ended up turning over into a pin, and he ended up going for the cover on Gunther, to which Gunther kicked out. Gunther ended up quickly cutting Kofi off with a strike to him. Kofi then ended up kicking Gunther in his leg from the mat, and he ended up getting to his feet. Gunther ended up chopping Kofi, but Kofi ended up stopping him with a jawbreaker. Kofi then ended up hitting the ropes, but Gunther ended up hitting a tilt-a-whirl backbreaker. Gunther's knee gave out after executing that tilt-a-whirl backbreaker on Kofi. Gunther ended up dropping an elbow. He climbed the second rope for a diving elbow drop, but Kofi moved out of the way. So Kofi ended up pulling himself up. He ended up kicking away at Gunther's injured leg. Gunther ended up blocking a kick from Kofi, and he ended up clubbing Kofi in his lower back. Kofi countered a short arm clothesline into a SOS attempt, and Kofi ended up fighting out of the corner. He then ended up hitting a pendulum kick in the corner. He comes off the top rope with a crossbody block. Kofi ended up getting up. He ended up going to Gunther, but Gunther ended up taking Kofi down and applied a Boston Crab. Kofi ended up twisting out, ended up kicking Gunther back. Kofi then ended up ducking a chop, and he ended up hitting an SOS. He ended up going for the cover, to which Gunther ended up kicking out. So we had later on, Gunther ended up going to the outside. He pulled Kofi to the ring post. He ended up stretching Kofi against the ring post. Gunther ended up releasing that because he didn't want to get disqualified. Gunther ended up going for a powerbomb on the floor, but Kofi countered that into a hurricanrana into the ring post to Gunther. Kofi then ended up hitting Gunther with the Trouble in Paradise. Gunther was down on the ground, so the ref was counting. As soon as the ref counted to 8, Kofi got into the ring. Ref counted to 9. Gunther got into the ring. Gunther barely ended up beating the count. So Kofi sized Gunther in the corner. He ended up going for another Trouble in Paradise, but Gunther avoided that. Gunther ended up crushing Kofi with a powerbomb. He ended up going for the cover. Kofi kicked out, and Gunther immediately transitioned into a Boston Crab on Kofi. Kofi ended up trying to fight out of that, but unfortunately, Kofi had no choice but to tap. So there you go. Gunther ended up winning the match. Gunther advances to the semifinals of the King of the Ring tournament, and he will face either Jey Uso or Ilja Dragunov. But very good match between Gunther and Kofi here. You know, Gunther going over Kofi. I like that they made Kofi look very competitive here. But good spots also in this match as well. And then we saw Jackie Redmond. Jackie Redmond was backstage with Lyra Valkyria. Jackie Redmond ended up saying that she had a great debut last week in Lyra Valkyria, beating Dakota Kai and helping Becky Lynch. Lyra ended up saying to Jackie Redmond that it's a perfect way to kickstart her rise to the top of Monday Night Raw. She ended up saying that Damage Control better get used to seeing her on Monday nights, and at any time Becky Lynch needs some Irish backup, she's here. So Becky Lynch walked up to Lyra. She ended up wishing Lyra luck, and then walked off. So quick Becky Lynch there. You know, just saying, you know, oh, I wish you luck in the match tonight. So Lyra ended up asking about facing Zoey Stark, to which Liv Morgan interrupted. And she wanted to say hello to Lyra and wish her luck. So Lyra ended up saying, that's nice of her. So Liv Morgan then ended up asking Lyra if Becky Lynch has always been a bitch. Lyra ended up telling Liv to ask Becky herself. So Becky Lynch was shown standing behind Liv Morgan. Becky Lynch ended up punching Liv Morgan in the face. She ended up saying to Liv Morgan that she's not the one scared of a face-to-face fight. And then Becky ended up calling Liv Morgan a bitch. So pretty much that was basically that. And as Monday Night Raw came back from the commercial, Kofi Kingston was shown hobbling backstage. Karrion Kross stopped Kofi. He ended up saying to Kofi that that was a tough loss, but there's always time to turn things around. So Karrion Kross walked off. Xavier Woods came up. He ended up asking Kofi what Karrion Kross wanted. So Kofi wasn't sure about that. And then we have Bronson Reed versus Akira Tozawa. This was a squash match. Bronson Reed went to the top rope, crushed Akira Tozawa with the tsunami. So there you go. Bronson Reed ended up winning the match. No surprise there. Post-match, Chad Gable got into the ring, started yelling at Tozawa. So that was that. Then we saw Gunther and Ludwig Kaiser walking backstage. Kathy Kelly came up to Gunther and Ludwig Kaiser, but Gunther walked off. Ludwig Kaiser ended up saying that Gunther shouldn't have to address Kathy Kelly after having a match. So Kathy Kelly ended up mentioning that the last time Gunther faced Ilja Dragunov, he lost. Of course, this was when both Gunther and Dragunov were down in NXT. So, Kathy Kelly ended up saying to Kaiser, as for Gunther's victory over Jey Uso, there was interference from Jimmy Uso. And she ended up saying that last week that Kaiser used some underhanded tactics against Sheamus. So Kaiser cut Kathy Kelly off, and he ended up saying to Kathy Kelly that Gunther is the greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time. 666 days as the Intercontinental Champion. He ended up saying that Gunther doesn't need to prove anything to anyone around here. Kaiser ended up saying that's for Sheamus. If anyone actually believes he lost that match because of Kaiser. He's delusional. So Kaiser ended up saying that Sheamus has had a legendary career and that he's never beaten Gunther. It never happened and never will. He ended up saying that Sheamus should be thanking him because he ended up saving him last week. Kaiser ended up saying that if Sheamus has a problem with that, he will put him out of his injury by exposing and embarrassing himself in front of the whole world. So Kaiser walked off, and that was basically that. So it looks like we're going to be getting Sheamus versus Kaiser at some point. So then as Monday Night Raw came back from the commercial, we saw Jackie Redmond. Jackie Redmond was backstage with Adam Pearce. New Catch Republic came in. Tyler Bate and Pete Dunne. Tyler Bate ended up thanking Adam Pearce for drafting him and Pete Dunne to Monday Night Raw, to which Adam Pearce ended up wishing the both of them luck. Pearce ended up saying that the draft is behind them, and that we're going to have a fatal four-way to determine the number one contenders for the tag team titles. So Adam Pearce ended up saying that it will be the New Catch Republic versus the Authors of Pain versus the Creed Brothers versus JD McDonough and Finn Balor, of course, of the Judgment Day. Jackie Redmond ended up liking that. So Jackie Redmond ended up asking about Braun Breaker not being in the King of the Ring tournament. Adam Pearce ended up saying to Jackie Redmond that Braun Breaker has unlimited potential, but the guys on the roster have proven themselves. He ended up saying that he doesn't want to throw Braun Breaker in the deep end. Braun Breaker then ended up coming in. He ended up saying to Adam Pearce that he wouldn't have been in the deep end with his opponents. He ended up saying he had smiled as he watched them drown. Braun Breaker ended up saying, I should have been in the damn tournament. And he ended up walking off. To which Adam Pearce ended up saying, wow. Now, I think that Braun Breaker should have been in the King of the Ring tournament. I agree with Braun Breaker. All that they gave Braun Breaker here is just squash matches, just to see his potential on the roster. And this is why I wish they would have drafted Baron Corbin to Monday Night Raw instead of SmackDown. I really enjoyed the tag team of Braun Breaker and Baron Corbin down in NXT. They were a good tag team. But we saw Baron Corbin lose on SmackDown. That shows where Baron Corbin is going to go on SmackDown. To me, WWE should have just kept Braun Breaker and Baron Corbin as a tag team on the main roster. They shouldn't have split them up in the draft. So then this leads to Pat McAfee going wild on commentary, doing Braun Breaker's Yeah, that's what Pat McAfee was doing. As it cut to him and Michael Cole. Pat McAfee just going doing Braun Breaker's barks. And then we had Zoey Stark versus Lyra Valkyria. Quarterfinal match in the Queen of the Ring tournament. Zoey Stark ended up making her way out first. And then Lyra made her way out. Match got in the way. Both women ended up blocking up. Both women back into the corner. Lyra ended up giving a clean break to Zoey Stark. Stark ended up shoving Lyra. And she ended up going for a clothesline. But Lyra ended up ducking it. Lyra ended up hooking a side headlock. She ended up releasing the headlock. And ended up hitting Zoey Stark with a diving back elbow off the second rope. Lyra then took Zoey Stark down with a headlock. Stark ended up fighting up and shoved Valkyria down. Valkyria ended up hitting the ropes and ended up hitting her Karana that sent Zoey Stark out of the ring. Valkyria ended up going to the apron, ended up knocking Stark away. Stark avoided a leap, and Valkyria's leg ended up looking hurt a little bit. Zoey Stark then clotheslined Lyra on the floor, and then Monday Night Raw went to commercial. So as Monday Night Raw came back from the commercial, Zoey Stark was in control of the match. She ended up connected with a springboard missile dropkick, and she ended up going for the cover, to which Lyra kicked out. Stark ended up applying a neck vice, and she was talking some trash to Lyra. Lyra ended up fighting up, but Stark ended up cutting Lyra off with some strikes. Zoey Stark ended up kicking Lyra down, ended up hitting the ropes, but Lyra ended up avoiding a run strike, and she ended up rolling Zoey Stark up, to which Zoey Stark ended up kicking out. We had Lyra end up getting Zoey Stark in the ring later on. She ended up hitting a top rope flying crossbody block to Zoey Stark, and then Lyra connected with a tornado DDT. She ended up going for the cover, to which Zoey Stark ended up kicking out. And we had the crowd end up chanting for Lyra, so they were behind her here. Stark ended up elbowing Lyra and started punching her. Stark ended up kicking Lyra's legs out, but Lyra ended up kicking up. Stark ended up avoiding a kick from Lyra, and she ended up turned Lyra inside out with a slam. She ended up going for the cover, to which Lyra ended up kicking out. So, at the end of the match, Zoey Stark ended up super kicking Lyra. She ended up going for the Z360. Lyra blocked it, and Lyra ended up hitting the Nightwing on Zoey Stark. Lyra Valkyria ended up going for the cover, and so there you go. She ended up winning the match. So now Lyra Valkyria will face Iyo Sky next week on Monday Night Raw in the semifinals match in the Queen of the Ring tournament. But overall, I thought this was a decent match here between Zoey Stark and Lyra Valkyria here. I like that Lyra got chants from the crowd here. So post-match, Jackie Redmond congratulated Lyra Valkyria on advancing to the semifinals of the Queen of the Ring tournament. And Jackie Redmond ended up asking Lyra, does she have anything to say to Iyo Sky? Lyra ended up saying that she's confident. She ended up saying that they'll find out what she means. So she ended up saying that she is a former NXT Women's Champion. And she flies as the crow flies, right to the top. So there you go. That was what Lyra had to say. Like I said, she'll be facing Iyo Sky next week on Monday Night Raw in the semifinals of the Queen of the Ring tournament. And so then we saw Jey Uso, Mr. Yeet. He ended up saying that Drew McIntyre couldn't cut it in the King of the Ring tournament. So he took his place and beat Finn Balor. Jey ended up saying that tonight he'll beat Ilja Dragunov. And then he'll beat Gunther next week. And he will be crowned the new King of the Ring. Yeet. So that was what Jey had to say. And then we had Sami Zayn versus Otis. This was a quick match here. We had Sami Zayn end up making his way out. Otis was already in the ring. Match ended up getting in the way. Both Sami Zayn and Otis locked up. Otis powered Sami into the corner. Sami ended up ducking an attack, and he started punching Otis. Otis then spinned Sami Zayn in the corner and clubbed him down. Otis then slinged Sami Zayn down before avalanching him in the corner. Sami Zayn ended up dropping down, and Otis started to gyrate, and Chad Gable ended up getting on the apron, and he started admonishing his number one guy. Otis started pacing around, and he ripped off his shirt. Otis did the caterpillar, and he delivered the elbow drop on Sami Zayn. Gable ended up ordering Otis to the second rope. Sami Zayn then avoided a Vader bomb, and he ended up catching Otis with the haluva kick. So Sami Zayn ended up going for the cover. And there you go. Sami Zayn ended up winning the match. Post-match, Chad Gable was furious that Otis lost the match. Gable started shouting at Otis. Gable ended up pie-facing Otis. So Sami Zayn ran to the ring. He ended up hitting Chad Gable with an exploder suplex into the turnbuckles. Sami Zayn ended up setting up for the haluva kick, but Chad Gable ended up avoiding that. Otis ended up trying to pull Gable back, but Gable ended up getting out of Otis' grip. Gable ended up shouting that this is his fault. This is Otis' fault. And he ended up slapping Otis in the face. And then Chad Gable walked off. Otis didn't even look happy that he got slapped in the face by Chad Gable. But then Otis ended up following, Chad Gable. And pretty much that was that. Overall, quick match this was. And as Monday Night Raw came back from the commercial, we saw Braun Strowman. Braun Strowman was talking to the Creed brothers and Ivy Nile backstage. Jade and McDonough ended up coming up to Braun Strowman with Judgment Day business. McDonough ended up saying that the Judgment Day don't like Strowman sticking his nose in their business. Strowman ended up saying that he can consider himself warned. McDonough then walked off. Strowman then started laughing at the threat, and he continued to talk to the Creed brothers and Ivy Nile. So that was that. Braun Strowman, he's not afraid of the Judgment Day. He's not afraid of McDonough. And then we had Dakota Kai versus Becky Lynch. Of course, Dakota Kai was accompanied by Iyo Sky and Kairi Sane. And this match was boring in my opinion. Didn't really care for it. So both Dakota and Becky end up getting into a shoving match. Dakota Kai ended up back into the corner. Becky Lynch started stomping Dakota Kai down. Becky ended up bouncing Dakota Kai off the top turnbuckle. She ended up pulling Dakota Kai to the next corner. And she ended up bouncing Dakota Kai off the turnbuckle. Becky ended up going to the next corner and bounced Dakota Kai a few times. Dakota Kai rolled out of the ring to recover. Becky ended up hitting a baseball slide and a flying clothesline off the apron to Dakota. Becky then ended up bouncing Dakota Kai off the apron, and then she ended up getting Dakota into the ring. Dakota Kai ended up going for a running shoulder, but Becky avoided that, to which Becky then ended up kicking Dakota back. Iyo got on the apron, but Becky ended up kicking Iyo to the floor. Becky ended up going to the top rope, but Dakota Kai cut her off, and she slammed Becky to the mat. Dakota Kai ended up choking Becky on the middle rope. She then bounced Becky off the top turnbuckle. Becky started to fight back, and she had put Dakota in the corner. Dakota ended up reversing the whip into the corner, but Becky ended up turning it around. Dakota ended up avoiding an avalanche, and she ended up booking Becky down. She then applied a rear chin lock on Becky, to which Becky ended up pulling Dakota Kai off and ended up catching Dakota with an enziguri. Dakota Kai ended up avoiding an avalanche from Becky, and Becky ended up avoiding a kick. Becky then springboarded off the bottom rope with a kick. So then Monday Night Raw went to commercial. Then when Monday Night Raw came back from the commercial, Dakota Kai ended up lifting Becky onto her shoulders. Becky ended up sliding off and rolled Dakota Kai up. Dakota Kai ended up kicking out at 2. Dakota Kai then transitioned into a roll-up, to which Becky ended up kicking out. Dakota Kai ended up attacking Becky's neck, and she ended up going for the cover, to which Becky kicked out. Dakota Kai then backed up and sized Becky up, but Becky ended up knocking Dakota Kai back. So at the end of the match, we had Becky Lynch end up applying this armor, but Iyo Sky and Kairi Sane end up quickly attacking Becky from behind, and the referee ended up calling for the match, so Becky Lynch ended up winning the match by disqualification. So Lyra Valkyria ended up running down. Lyra Valkyria ended up hitting both Dakota Kai and Kairi Sane with enziguris. Lyra then faced off against Iyo Sky, of course, who she's going to face next week on Monday Night Raw in the semifinals of the Queen of the Ring tournament. Iyo ended up going for a clothesline, but Lyra ducked it. Becky Lynch clotheslined Iyo Sky down. And then, out of nowhere, Liv Morgan runs in from behind, ends up sending Becky Lynch into the ring post shoulder first. Liv Morgan then escaped the ring as Lyra Valkyria checked on Becky, and that was basically that. Overall, I thought this was a boring match between Becky and Dakota Kai here. Felt long. And then we had Jackie Redmond. Jackie Redmond, very busy tonight. So she was backstage with Ilja Dragunov. So she ended up telling Dragunov that last week he had a thrilling victory against Ricochet. And now he's in the main event against Jey Uso in the quarterfinal match of the King of the Ring tournament. Dragunov ended up saying to Jackie Redmond that some would say this is a dream to be here, but it's not enough to just be here. Dragunov ended up saying that he is here to make an impact, night in and night out. He ended up saying that it starts with him becoming the Cesar of the ring. He ended up saying last week, him and Ricochet pushed themselves to the absolute limit. And it was a very good match between Dragunov and Ricochet last week. Dragunov ended up saying that he struck when he had the moment, and that he'll take the same fight in the main event to Jey Uso. He ended up saying what is waiting on the other side is a different animal, only a few have beaten. Dragunov ended up saying that he is a different dragon, and that he'll beat Gunther. He ended up saying that he has a long history with Gunther, and one thing is for sure, it is not over. Dragunov looked over, and he saw Gunther standing there. Gunther ended up smirking at Dragunov, and he walked off. Dragunov ended up staring at Gunther intensely, and that was basically that. And then, as Monday Night Raw came back from the commercial, we had the number one contenders Fatal 4-Way Tag Team match. The winners will be the number one contenders to face Awesome Truth for the World Tag Team Championships. So it was Baszler and Jaden McDonough of the Judgment Day versus the New Catch Republic, Tyler Bate and Pete Dunne, versus the Creed brothers, Brutus and Julius Creed, versus the Authors of Pain. And this was a decent Fatal 4-Way here. Baszler ended up starting off against Tyler Bate. Baszler ended up taking it to Bate and tagged McDonough in. McDonough ended up picking at Tyler Bate's leg and started stomping on Tyler Bate's midsection. Bate ended up grapevining McDonough's head, and he tagged Pete Dunne in. So both Bate and Dunne ended up hitting McDonough with a double team back body drop. Pete Dunne ended up grabbing McDonough's fingers, and he ended up doing the joint manipulation, and then he started stomping on McDonough's arm. McDonough fought back, and Pete Dunne stumbled into the Creed brothers' corner. So the Creed brothers ended up double teaming McDonough with a gutbuster. McDonough ended up booting the Creed brothers back, but Akam and Razor got into the ring, and they ended up attacking McDonough. They ended up slamming the New Catch Republic into each other. So the Authors of Pain ended up grabbing McDonough, and they ended up throwing McDonough over the top rope onto the opponents, Akam and Razor. And then Monday Night Raw went to commercial. Then when Monday Night Raw came back from the commercial, Baszler was in control of the match. He started stomping Brutus in the corner. McDonough tagged in, and he quickly tagged Baszler back in. So McDonough and Baszler knocked the New Catch Republic off the apron. Brutus then ended up hitting a double clothesline on both McDonough and Baszler. Julius ended up tagging in. He ended up hitting Baszler and McDonough with belly-to-belly suplexes. Akam came in, and Julius ended up drop-kicking Akam out of the ring. Julius then knocked Razor off the apron. He then hit both Baszler and McDonough with a double Northern Light suplex. Julius ended up hitting a standing shooting star press, and he ended up going for the cover, but he ended up moving as McDonough ended up trying to attack. McDonough ended up hitting Baszler instead, which was funny. So Julius ended up sending McDonough out of the ring. Baszler ended up rolling Julius up, and Julius ended up kicking out. Baszler connected with a sling blade, which was followed up by a drop kick. Baszler headed to the top rope, and we had Tyler Bate and Pete Dunne end up cutting Baszler off. Both Pete Dunne and Tyler Bate ended up taking out the Authors of Pain with moonsault blocks off the second rope to the floor. Julius hopped up to the top rope. He ended up hitting Baszler with a superplex, to which Julius ended up going for the cover, and Baszler ended up kicking out. Yeah, later on in the match where Tyler Bate ended up hitting McDonough with a somersault suicide dive, Pete Dunne started punching away at McDonough on the commentary table, and Carlito ran down. Carlito ended up hitting Pete Dunne with a backstabber on the commentary table, which was great. Pete Dunne was then put back into the ring. Baszler then went for the coup de grace on Pete Dunne, and so he ended up going for the cover, And there you go. Baszler and Jaden McDonough end up winning the match. And Awesome Truth, the Miz and R-Truth did not look too happy about that. So, looks like, once again, we're going to be getting Baszler and Jaden McDonough versus R-Truth and the Miz. Overall, it was a decent Fatal 4-Way here to determine the number one contenders for the World Tag Team Championship. And then we got what we're going to see next week on Monday Night Raw. It's going to be Sami Zayn versus Chad Gable. And of course, the Queen of the Ring semifinals, Lyra Valkyria will take on Iyo Sky. And, of course, the King of the Ring semifinals, Gunther will face either Jey Uso or Ilja Dragunov. So that's to look forward to next week on Monday Night Raw. And then we saw Ilja Dragunov. Ilja Dragunov was warming up, and Ricochet walked in. Ricochet with his glasses and his suit and tie. So Ricochet ended up saying that he wants to show respect to Dragunov. He ended up saying that the next time it happens, the outcome will be different. He ended up saying to Dragunov, as for tonight, he wishes Dragunov luck. So pretty much that was that. And then as Monday Night Raw came back from the commercial, we saw Damian Priest. Damian Priest ended up asking Dominic if all is well with him and Rhea Ripley. Finn Balor and Jay McDonough end up walking in with Carlito. Priest ended up staring at Carlito. So Carlito takes the hint and goes to leave. Priest stopped Carlito. He ended up saying what happened out there was cool. Priest then asked Carlito if he can handle his business with Rey Mysterio, and that they don't roll with cowards. Priest ended up telling Carlito not to let them down, to which Carlito was pleased. So, that was basically that. Main event, Jey Uso versus Ilja Dragunov. Quarterfinal match of the King of the Ring tournament. Very good main event this was here between both these guys. Match ended up getting underway. Both Jey and Dragunov circled the ring. Both guys locked up. They ended up tussling to the corner. Dragunov had Jey in the corner, and Jey ended up ducking a chop from Dragunov. Dragunov ended up connected with two chops of his own to Jey. Dragunov ended up blocking a kick from Jey. He ended up ducking an enziguri. He ended up dropping Jey with another chop. Dragunov ended up hitting Jey with a run knee, and he comes off the middle rope with a diving knee to the chest. Dragunov ended up going to the top rope, but Jey ended up punching Dragunov down to the floor. Jey connected with a suicide dive that sent Dragunov into the commentary table. Jey ended up lifting Dragunov, but he slid off, and he ended up hitting a leaping kick to Dragunov's head. Dragunov ended up clearing off the commentary table. He ended up chopping Jey onto the table. Dragunov climbed to the top of the barricade. He ended up going for the H-bomb, but Jey moved out of the way. Dragunov hit the commentary table hard. Jey ended up getting in the ring to break up the count. Jey then ended up spearing Dragunov over the commentary table, which was crazy. And then Monday Night Raw went to commercial. Then when Monday Night Raw came back from the commercial, Dragunov ended up applying a abdominal stretch on Jey. Jey fought out, and he ended up hitting a hip toss on Dragunov. Jey ended up decking Dragunov with a right hand. Dragunov came back with a right hand of his own to Jey. Jey ended up punching back. Dragunov ended up chopping Jey. Jey and Dragunov ended up chopping at each other. And then Dragunov ended up hitting some forearms to Jey. Jey ended up coming back with some punches. And he ended up punching Dragunov down. Dragunov then ended up blocking a kick. And he spinned Jey. But Jey ended up flattening Dragunov with an enziguri. So Dragunov ended up turning Jey inside out with a boot to his face. Dragunov then ended up sizing Jey up, and he ended up hitting a German suplex to Jey. So later on in the match, we had Dragunov end up chopping away at Jey in the corner, and he backed up. Dragunov ended up hitting some boots to Jey Uso's face, and he then delivered a running boot. Dragunov ended up setting up for another German suplex, but Jey ended up fighting out. Jey countered the Constantine special, and he ended up super kicking Dragunov twice. He ended up going for the cover, to which Dragunov ended up kicking out. So Jey Uso's ear was bleeding from, one of his piercings. So Jey ended up sizing Dragunov up, but Dragunov ended up kneeing Jey in his face. Dragunov ended up hitting a second knee to Jey's face, and he powerbombed Jey down. Dragunov then ended up smashing Jey with the H-bomb. He ended up going for the cover, to which Jey kicked out. Dragunov ended up going to the corner. He ended up waiting for Jey to get up. Dragunov ended up charging at Jey, but Jey ended up splitting Dragunov in half because he delivered the spear to Dragunov. So Jey ended up heading to the top rope, and he delivered the Uso splash on Dragunov. He ended up going for the cover, and there you go. Jey Uso ended up winning the match. So Jey Uso advances to the semifinals of the King of the Ring tournament next week, and he will face Gunther. Post-match, Gunther headed down to the ring. He walked up to Jey. Jey ended up doing his yeet at Gunther, and pretty much that was basically how Monday Night Raw went off the air. But overall, this was a very good match between Jey Uso and Ilja Dragunov here. Was disappointed that Jey Uso got the win here. I thought that Dragunov was going to get the win, and we would get, Gunther and Ilja Dragunov, maybe in the finals in Saudi Arabia. But unfortunately, that's not the case, because I don't see Gunther losing to Jey Uso next week. Gunther's going to defeat Jey Uso. But disappointed that we're not going to see, Ilja Dragunov versus Gunther in this tournament. But WWE might be holding off, Gunther versus Dragunov at another time. And so until then, I can't wait until, it happens. We're going to see another Gunther versus Dragunov match. But Gunther is my pick to win the King of the Ring tournament. But overall, Monday Night Raw, decent show tonight. It was enjoyable. But anyways, that's it for the Monday Night Raw review. Thank you all for watching. Hope you all enjoyed this review. Definitely give the video a thumbs up. Comment, subscribe. I won't be reviewing Dynamite on Wednesday or SmackDown on Friday, because Wednesday I'll be seeing I'll be doing the Transformers 40th anniversary thing that they're doing at my local Alamo Draft House, where they're showing 3 episodes of the original Transformers cartoon. So I'm going to that event. And then Friday I'm going to see, Batman 89, classic, with Michael Keaton, directed by Tim Burton. So I'm going to see that in theater. That's going to be a fun experience because, Batman 89 is one of my favorites. So there will be no Dynamite or SmackDown reviews this week. But until next video, I'll see you all later.